No one in that press room was ready for what happened next. It started like any other White House briefing, reporters lined up, cameras rolling, and Karoline Leavitt standing at the podium ready to take questions. But then, out of nowhere, a liberal reporter took the opportunity to attack something far more personal than politics: her faith. His words weren't just a question. They were a mockery, a direct jab meant to humiliate her in front of the entire room. "No cross today?" Guess the faith was just a prop. The smirk on his face said it all. He thought he had her cornered. The room fell silent. A few reporters shifted uncomfortably. Others sat up, eager to see how she would react. They expected her to stumble, to get defensive, to fumble for an answer. But Karoline didn't flinch. Instead, she paused, looked him dead in the eye, and delivered a response so powerful that it left the entire room in complete shock. What she said next didn't just shut him down, it flipped the entire narrative against the media itself. And within hours, the internet exploded. What exactly happened in that press room? How did Karoline turn the attack back on the media with just a few words? And most importantly, why did this moment change everything? Let's break it all down. The room was packed. Bright lights from cameras lined the walls, journalists scribbled notes, and the usual hum of chatter filled the air. It was another routine day in the White House press briefing room. Karoline Leavitt stepped up to the podium, poised and prepared. As the White House press secretary, she had faced her fair share of tough questions, but today felt no different, at least, at first. The questions started off as expected: policy updates, economic outlook, border security. Karoline answered each one with the same confidence and precision that had made her a rising star in the political world. But then, the energy in the room shifted. A reporter, one of the more vocal critics of the administration, leaned forward in his seat. His voice carried a smug tone, and there was something in his expression that made it clear. He wasn't here to ask about policy. This wasn't about facts. This was about discrediting Karoline on a personal level. And then he asked it, a single sentence, a throwaway comment wrapped in a question, but designed to do one thing: humiliate her. "No cross today?" Guess the faith was just a prop. The words hung in the air. Some reporters snickered quietly. Others exchanged nervous glances. A few even leaned in closer, ready to watch the exchange unfold. It was a challenge, a direct shot at Karoline's personal beliefs. And in that moment, every eye in the room was on her. Was she going to stumble? Was she going to get defensive, fumble for words, or brush it off? That's what they expected. But Karoline, she had something else in mind. The room was still. The usual rustling of papers and quiet murmurs had vanished, replaced by an almost palpable tension. Karoline Leavitt didn't move. She didn't rush to respond. She simply let the moment sit. Her eyes locked onto the reporter who had just tried to discredit her faith in front of the entire nation. He smirked, shifting slightly in his chair as if he knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't an innocent question. This wasn't about policy or governance. This was a calculated attack designed to paint Karoline as a hypocrite, to suggest that her public displays of faith were nothing more than a political act. And he had done it in the most condescending way possible. "No cross today?" Guess the faith was just a prop. A few soft chuckles rippled through the press corps, though some reporters looked visibly uncomfortable. Even they knew this was a step too far. Karoline took a slow breath, her expression unreadable. She wasn't rattled, she wasn't flustered, but everyone could feel it, the shift in the air. This wasn't just a momentary jab. This was an attempt to undermine her credibility in real time, a challenge. And now every camera was rolling, every microphone was hot, and the entire world was waiting to see how she would respond. Would she take the bait? Would she get defensive? Would she let the media set the narrative? That's what they were expecting. But what happened next? No one saw it coming. For a brief moment, it was as if the entire room forgot to breathe. Karoline didn't flinch. She didn't shift her weight, didn't glance away, didn't even furrow her brow. Instead, she stayed perfectly still, her eyes locked onto the reporter who had just mocked her faith in front of the entire nation. The smirk on his face lingered, as if he had already decided how this was going to go. He expected Karoline to get defensive, stumble over her words, or awkwardly dodge the question. That's how these exchanges usually went. The media asked the loaded question, the politicians scrambled for damage control, and the narrative was set. But this time, that script was about to be flipped. Karoline tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. Then, with the kind of controlled confidence that only comes from absolute certainty, she spoke, calm, measured, but piercing. "Did you really just say that?" The smirk on the reporter's face flickered just for a second. A few reporters in the room shifted in their seats. The tension was so thick, you could almost feel the discomfort radiating from certain corners of the press corps. But Karoline wasn't done. She took her time, letting the weight of her words settle. She wasn't reacting emotionally. She wasn't scrambling for a response. She was controlling the moment. "Let me get this straight," she continued, her voice even but deliberate. "You're implying that my faith is performative because I'm not wearing a cross today?" The reporter's confidence faltered. He opened his mouth to respond, but Karoline wasn't finished. "See, that's the problem with the media today." And just like that, the energy in the room shifted. The attack wasn't on her anymore. It was on them. Karoline was about to turn this moment into something far bigger than they ever expected. The air in the room felt heavier now. The cameras were still rolling, but no one dared to interrupt. Karoline held her ground, unshaken. The reporter had expected her to get defensive, to stumble, to deflect, but instead, she was doing something far more dangerous to his narrative. She was owning the moment. She took a slow breath, then leaned forward slightly. Her voice, calm but sharp, cut through the silence like a knife. "You know, it's interesting," she began, her tone carrying a mix of curiosity and amusement. "Faith isn't about wearing a symbol. It's about how you live your life, and maybe that's why you don't understand it." A low murmur rippled through the room. Some reporters exchanged glances. They knew this wasn't going the way the media had planned. The reporter opened his mouth to interject, but Karoline wasn't done. "See, I could wear a cross every single day, and you'd still find a reason to question my faith." She paused, letting the words sink in before delivering the next blow. "And yet the same media that demands proof of my faith is completely silent when Christian values are mocked, when religious Americans are ridiculed, and when people of faith are told they should keep their beliefs out of public life." The silence in the room grew even deeper. The smug confidence on the reporter's face was gone. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, realizing too late that he had made a serious mistake. Karoline took another breath, her voice steady but firm. "And if you're so concerned about my personal faith, maybe you should start by asking why faith itself is under attack in this country. Why people who believe in God are constantly questioned, dismissed, or mocked by the very institutions that claim to stand for tolerance." Her words hit like a hammer. A few gasps. Some reporters scribbling furiously in their notepads, others looking down, avoiding eye contact. The balance of power in the room had completely shifted. This wasn't an attack on Karoline anymore. It was an indictment of the media itself. And the reporter. For the first time in the exchange, he had nothing to say. Karoline let the silence hang in the air for just a second longer. She could see it in the reporter's face. He was scrambling, searching for a way to take back control. But there was nothing he could say that wouldn't prove her point even further. And that's when she delivered the final blow. She leaned back slightly, her hands resting confidently on the podium. Then, in a voice that was calm but razor-sharp, she said the words that would send shockwaves through the media world. And this is exactly why people don't trust the media. The room tensed. Some reporters glanced at each other. Others kept their heads down, furiously typing notes. The cameras captured every second of what was now becoming a viral moment in the making. Karoline didn't stop there. You don't ask these questions to hold people accountable. You ask them to create a headline. You don't care about the answer. You just want the soundbite that fits your narrative. The reporter blinked, caught off guard. He opened his mouth, but Karoline was already one step ahead. "If I wear a cross, you call it performative. If I don't, you question my faith. If I speak about my beliefs, I'm pushing an agenda. If I don't, I'm hiding something. No matter what I do, you've already decided the story you're going to tell." The press stayed silent. The smug confidence from earlier? Gone. Karoline let her words settle for a moment before she drove her point home. "So, let me make this very clear. My faith is not a costume. It's not a political strategy. It's who I am. And it doesn't change just because you're uncomfortable with it." The weight of her statement hit the room like a tidal wave. The very reporter who had tried to corner her, mock her, discredit her, was now sitting there, completely exposed. He had walked into that briefing thinking he was setting the trap, but now he was the one caught in it. Karoline looked directly at him, her voice unwavering. Maybe instead of questioning my faith, you should start questioning your own integrity. The room was stunned. Reporters who had been ready to pile on now sat quietly, unsure of how to react. The usual back-and-forth sparring that defined White House press briefings, nowhere to be found. Because for the first time in a long time, the media had been called out, directly, publicly, and undeniably, and they had no response. The moment the press briefing ended, the real battle began. The reporters who had sat in stunned silence during Karoline's takedown rushed to spin the narrative before it spiraled completely out of their control, but they were already too late. Within minutes, clips of the exchange began flooding social media. The hashtag Karoline exposes the media started trending, and conservative commentators wasted no time turning her response into a rallying cry. The clip wasn't just being shared, it was being analyzed, dissected, and replayed by millions. Every major conservative outlet picked it up immediately. Fox News ran the headline, "Karoline Leavitt shuts down liberal media's attack on her faith." The Daily Wire called it one of the most brutal takedowns of the press in recent history. Even independent journalists were weighing in. You don't have to agree with Karoline to admit she just outclassed the press in their own game. Meanwhile, mainstream media outlets were scrambling. Some networks tried to ignore the moment completely, refusing to cover it at all, hoping it would fade away. Others attempted to downplay the exchange, framing it as an intense back and forth rather than what it really was, a total embarrassment for the press. But the footage didn't lie. Anyone who watched it knew exactly what had happened, and the reporter? He had gone completely silent. No follow-up statement, no defense, no damage control, nothing. Because what could he even say? Karoline hadn't dodged the question. She hadn't stumbled or tried to change the subject. She had met him head-on and turned his own words against him, and the media had no idea how to handle it. On Twitter, the reactions exploded. That reporter thought he was going to embarrass Karoline. Instead, she just ended his career. This is why people don't trust the media anymore. They attack people of faith, and when they get called out, they run. Whether you like her or not, Karoline handled that with pure class. That reporter just got exposed. Some liberal voices tried to defend the reporter, claiming that Karoline was dodging the question or playing the victim, but even their own viewers weren't buying it. One high-profile CNN contributor attempted to spin the moment, tweeting, "This was just a normal exchange between a press secretary and the media. Why are conservatives acting like this was a big deal?" The response was brutal. Within minutes, thousands of replies flooded in. If it wasn't a big deal, why is your side so desperate to pretend it didn't happen? If a conservative reporter had said this to a Democrat about their religion, you'd be calling for them to be fired. Admit it, Karoline embarrassed you guys and you don't know what to do about it. Even among left-leaning media personalities, there was hesitation. They knew that no amount of spin could undo what had just happened. Karoline hadn't just defended herself, she had exposed the media's double standard in real time on live television, and the American people saw it. Conservative talk shows devoted entire segments to the moment. Tucker Carlson declared, "The media picked a fight they weren't ready for, and Karoline Leavitt just made them regret it." Ben Shapiro broke it down point by point, explaining how Karoline had flipped the attack back on the press and made them look like complete hypocrites. Glenn Beck called it one of the clearest examples of media bias we've seen in years. But the most damaging part of the backlash? Even moderate, apolitical Americans were siding with Karoline. Viewers who normally didn't engage in political debates started to weigh in, commenting on news articles and sharing the clip with outrage over the media's behavior. I don't care what your politics are. You don't attack someone's faith like that. I'm not a Republican, but Karoline absolutely owned that reporter. Good for her. This just proves that the media will do anything to tear down people they don't like. The clip spread internationally, with even foreign journalists raising eyebrows at how unprofessional the exchange was. By the end of the day, the viral clip had millions of views across platforms. Conservative media kept replaying it, while mainstream outlets tried their best to move on. But no matter what they did, the story wasn't going away, because this wasn't just a viral moment. This was a turning point. And for the media, it wasn't just a bad look. It was a full-blown crisis. The media was in full damage control mode. They had lost control of the narrative, and now they were scrambling to twist, spin, and bury the story before it did any more damage. But no matter how hard they tried, the video had already taken on a life of its own. Millions had seen it. Millions more were still watching. Karoline Leavitt's moment at the podium wasn't fading away. It was growing bigger. And then, just when the media thought they could move past it, Karoline spoke out. Her first move was simple but devastating, a single tweet. Faith isn't a prop, it's a foundation, and no amount of media attacks will change that. Within minutes, the post had thousands of likes. Within an hour, it had hundreds of thousands of shares. By the time the sun set that evening, #Karoline exposes the media was trending at #1 nationwide. The media's worst nightmare had come true. Karoline wasn't backing down. She wasn't apologizing, she wasn't explaining herself, she wasn't letting the press twist her words. She was standing firm. And that's when the floodgates opened. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, every platform exploded with reactions, people from all walks of life. Politicians, influencers, pastors, celebrities, all had something to say. Even those who weren't political couldn't ignore what had happened. I don't care if you're left or right. That reporter was out of line, and Karoline handled it with absolute class. I don't care what your politics are. Attacking someone's faith to score points? That's disgusting. The media just embarrassed themselves on a national stage. Again, Karoline just gave a master class on how to shut down media hypocrisy. Take notes. Some liberal commentators tried to fight back, claiming that Karoline was dodging a serious question, that she had played the victim instead of giving a direct answer. But their own audiences weren't buying it. One MSNBC host tweeted, "Conservatives are celebrating an official dodging a real question. Funny how accountability only matters when it's convenient for them." The response was brutal. If it wasn't a big deal, why is your side so desperate to pretend it didn't happen? If a conservative reporter had said this to a Democrat about their religion, you'd be calling for them to be fired. Maybe stop attacking people's religion and you won't have moments like this. Just a thought. The pushback was instant and overwhelming. Karoline wasn't the one looking bad. It was the press who had been exposed for exactly what they were: biased, manipulative, and more interested in creating scandals than reporting facts. Within hours, conservative politicians, media figures, and thought leaders flooded social media with messages of support. Fox News commentators replayed the clip on loop, praising her for standing her ground. Ben Shapiro called it one of the most embarrassing moments for the media in years, breaking down the exchange point by point. Tucker Carlson declared, "This is what happens when the press tries to play gotcha with someone who actually knows what they're doing." Glenn Beck called the attack on Karoline a perfect example of the media's war on faith. But it wasn't just political figures weighing in. Pastors, religious leaders, and faith-based organizations began rallying behind Karoline, using her moment to highlight the broader cultural battle against religious values in America. One prominent church leader tweeted, "If you ever needed proof that the media despises Christianity, just watch what happened to Karoline today." The message resonated. Across social media, thousands of people shared their own experiences of being mocked for their faith, turning this into something far bigger than just one press briefing. Karoline wasn't just defending herself anymore. She had become a symbol of the fight against media bias. Meanwhile, the mainstream media was in freefall. They knew this was a disaster. They knew they had lost the public's trust even more, and they only had one strategy left: pretend it never happened. CNN, MSNBC, The Washington Post, all of them refused to cover the story. No headlines, no opinion pieces, no media panels discussing what had happened. They wanted it erased. But it was already too late. Conservative media dominated the news cycle, keeping the moment alive while mainstream outlets scrambled to shift the focus elsewhere. It wasn't working, because by now, even neutral, apolitical Americans were paying attention, and they weren't siding with the media. Just when it seemed like the story couldn't get any bigger, Karoline took it one step further. That night, she went on national television for a primetime interview. Sitting across from a conservative host, she was asked directly, "What do you make of the media's reaction today?" She didn't hesitate. "The reporter didn't ask me a question. He made an accusation disguised as a question. And the reason people are so upset is because, for the first time, the media didn't get away with it. The host nodded. So you think this was about more than just you? Karoline leaned forward slightly, her voice steady and confident. Absolutely. This was never just about me. This was about how the media operates, how they try to discredit people they disagree with, how they use faith, values, and personal beliefs as weapons. But this time, it didn't work, and they hate that. The interview went viral immediately. Within hours, Karoline's words were all over social media, being clipped, shared, and replayed by millions. Her tweet had been one thing, but this was a direct challenge to the media itself. She wasn't just defending her own faith, she was defending millions of Americans who felt the same way. And now, there was no stopping the movement behind her. At this point, mainstream networks knew they had to say something. Late-night talk show hosts took cheap shots mocking Karoline for her meltdown at the podium, even though anyone who had actually seen the footage knew she never lost her cool. One liberal news analyst claimed, "This is just conservatives playing victim again. No one attacked Karoline's faith, they just asked a simple question." But once again they were met with instant backlash. Playing victim? She didn't whine or cry. She owned that reporter and left him speechless. If this was a simple question, why did the whole room fall silent when she answered it? Keep spinning. It's not working. By the end of the week, one thing was clear. Karoline had won. The media had embarrassed themselves. And this moment, it wasn't just a viral exchange. It was a defining moment in the war between the press and the American people. And the worst part for the media? They had no one to blame but themselves. By now, the dust had settled. The media had done everything in their power to control the damage, but it was too late. The clip had gone viral. Karoline Leavitt had won the exchange, and the press had once again exposed themselves as openly hostile to conservative values. But this wasn't just about one moment at a press briefing. This was about something bigger. This was about why Americans are losing trust in the media. This was about the increasing attacks on faith, traditional values, and anyone who dares to push back against the leftist agenda. Karoline Leavitt's response didn't just shut down a reporter. It highlighted a much deeper issue that millions of Americans have been feeling for years. And that's why this moment wasn't going away. This wasn't just another political debate. This was a defining moment that put the media's blatant bias on full display, not just for conservatives, but for everyday Americans who saw how unfairly people of faith were being treated. Because here's the truth. This isn't the first time the media has gone after someone's faith, and it won't be the last. For years, the press has treated Christianity and conservative values in general as something to be mocked, dismissed, or attacked. When a liberal politician talks about their faith, the media praises them for being open and inspiring. When a conservative does the same, they're accused of pushing an agenda. When a Democrat speaks about God, it's called brave. When a Republican does, it's called problematic. The double standard is undeniable. The reporter who went after Karoline's faith wasn't just trying to embarrass her. He was doing what the media always does to conservatives. He wanted to trap her. He wanted to make her look like a fraud. But he failed. Because for once a conservative fought back. And instead of falling into the media's game, Karoline turned it around on them. And that's why this moment was so much bigger than just a press briefing. This wasn't just about Karoline. This was about every Christian, every conservative, every American who has been told to keep their faith to themselves. This was about millions of people who have felt the pressure to stay silent because they know that the moment they speak up, they'll be mocked, ridiculed, or dismissed. And Karoline just proved something. You don't have to stay silent. You don't have to let the media dictate the conversation. You don't have to apologize for your faith, your values, or your beliefs. Because when you stand firm, when you don't let them intimidate you, when you refuse to play their game, you win. That's exactly what Karoline did. She didn't back down. She didn't flinch. And the result? The entire press corps, the same people who love to control the narrative, were left speechless. Even days later, they still didn't know how to handle it. Because this moment wasn't supposed to happen. They were supposed to be the ones asking the tough questions. They were supposed to be the ones in control, but for once they weren't. And now, they were terrified. Because if more conservatives follow Karoline's lead, if more people refuse to play along, if more Americans call out the hypocrisy instead of running from it, then the media's entire system of control starts to crumble. And that's why this moment matters, because this isn't just about one exchange at a press briefing. This is about a shift that's already happening, and for the first time in a long time, the media isn't the one in control anymore.